Hi, fifth grade. Today we're going to be doing Module 1, Lesson 5, and we are now moving into a new topic. And for this new topic, we are going to have some different types of math that we're going to be looking at. But before we move into that math, we're going to be taking a look at different ways to express numbers. And what this means is that I'm going to take 1,000, so it's kind of like I'm saying it in word form, and I'm going to show you what 1,000 looks like in a lot of different ways. This lesson is going to be really important for you to copy down all of my notes, so all of this right here should be copied down in your notebook, and you're also going to want to copy down this right here. Any work I do, please copy down in your notebook as well, because these are going to be important notes for this lesson. So with that, let's get started with our lesson 5. So what I'm first going to be doing is, let's say I said this number out loud, 1,000. What we're going to do is show what this number looks like in standard form, expanded form, and unit form. And you may not know what all of these are yet. You may be familiar with expanded form, but I'm going to show you what all of these are for this example. So we're going to start with standard form. Standard form is the way that you're used to seeing numbers most likely. So for 1,000th, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it first as a decimal, since this is what we're used to seeing the most. So for 1,000th, I know that my thousandths place is all the way over here. So it's 3 spaces past my decimal point. So I know that I should have a decimal. And I'll also put that 0 before the decimal. So I have 0 points, and then a 0 in my tenths, a 0 in my hundredths, and then finally, once I get to that thousandths, since I only have 1 thousandths, I'll put a 1 in my thousandths place. And this is how we write 1 thousandths. Now, I can also write 1 thousandths as a fraction. And the way I would write this is I would write it as 1 over 1,000. So I'm showing you that I have 1,000th. And that is how we would write it as a fraction. So far, not too bad. Make sure you have this in your chart. Now, if I want to write it in expanded form, this is where it might get a little bit different. Since I am working with decimals now, this is going to be a different way of doing expanded form. But I'm going to show you how first we're going to do this in decimal form. So when I want to do expanded form, I'm going to look at the number that is in the place value that I'm trying to expand. So since I have 1 in my thousandths place, what this tells me is that I have 1 copy of, I'm going to start calling this multiplication symbol here copies of for this lesson. And what I have 1 copy of is 1,000th. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this 1,000th as a decimal. So I now, in expanded form, I'm showing you that I have 1 copy of 1,000th. Now I can also do this in a fraction. It's just a little bit different. A couple things I'll need to add. Again, I'm going to write the number 1. And I'm still going to have that 1 copy of, so I'm still going to put that multiplication symbol there. Now where it's going to change a bit is I'm going to put a parentheses, and inside the parentheses, I'm going to take that fraction that I wrote earlier and put it in there. So I am showing you that I have 1 copy of 1,000th. And that's all I need to do for that part. So make sure you're writing down both of these examples. And what this is showing me is it's showing me what my digits are worth and the total value. Because if I were to multiply and solve this, I would be left with 1,000th. And the same thing for the fraction side, I would be left with 1,000th. Now we're going to move on to the unit form. And the unit form is a little bit different. You may have heard me talking about it in class a bit. But this is showing me how many of each size unit I have. So in this case, we're almost rewriting what you see up here. The only difference is that instead of having 1 in word form, I'm going to instead use a numeral. So I'm going to write 1, the number 1, and then I'm just going to write this word thousandth, because that is the unit that I have, or the place value that I'm working with. So I have 1,000th. So fifth grade, right here, what you're seeing is all the different ways that I can show the number 1,000th. I could say the word 1,000th. I can write it as a decimal as 0.001. I can write it as a fraction as 1,000th. I can write it in expanded form in the decimal as 1 copy of 1,000, and the same thing with fractions. And I can also write it in unit form with the numeral in the front. So, not so bad so far. What I'm going to do now is we're going to take a look at a different number. We're going to try 3,000ths. So, I'm going to leave that thousands right there, and then you should be following along with me. So, I'm going to say the number in word form, 3,000ths, and if anything ever asks you to write something in word form, this is basically what it is asking for. So this is word form, 3,000ths, and I need to write this as a decimal right now. So as a decimal, if I have 3 in my thousandths place, I'm going to have a 0, then a decimal point. I have 0 tenths, 0 hundredths, but I have 3,000, so I'll write it like this. As a fraction, my denominator is going to be my numerator, is going to be a 3, and then my denominator will be the thousands, because this fraction right here reads as 3,000ths. Now, expanded form is where this gets a little bit trickier. So in expanded form, what I need to see is how many copies of 1,000th that I have. So I take a look at this numeral right here, and I see that I have the number 3. So this tells me that I have 3 copies of, and then what I'm going to do is I'm not going to write this 3. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write 3 copies of 1,000th. So I will write that just like I did from the previous problem. I have 3 copies of 1,000th. Because if I were to multiply and solve this, what I would have is 3,000ths. And that's a good way to check your expanded forms to see if they're correct. If they all multiply out to the decimal that you started with, then you have the right answer. Now for my fraction, what I'm going to do is I again have 3 copies of, so I take a look at that numerator, so 3 copies of. Remember when I do fractions, I always have those parentheses. And then I'm just going to rewrite what 1,000th looks like as a fraction. And that is how I would write the expanded form with a fraction. So 3 times parentheses 1,000th. Now for the unit form, remember this is almost similar to my word form, except I want a numeral out in front. So since I have 3,000ths, I will write the numeral 3, and then I'll write the unit, which is thousandths. So we have 3,000ths. That's a long word to write. We have 3,000ths, and that is how I would say this and write this in unit form. So not too bad yet, especially since we're just working with one place value. But for our next problem, we're going to move into working with another place value and see how this changes up our numbers. So make sure you have this written down, and then get ready to work on the next problem with me. All right, so for this next problem, what I have now is I have 13 thousandths. And for this one, if you want to try it on your own and see how you're doing, you could try that. If you don't feel comfortable just yet, that's okay. You can work along with me. So what we're first going to start with is our standard form with our decimal. This is usually the easiest way to start out. Now if I have 13 thousandths, what that means is I can kind of start by writing the number 13. And then figure out where my decimal points and things like that need to go beyond that. So if I have 13 thousandths, what that means is that the last digit needs to be in my thousandths place. So this 3 needs to be in my thousandths place, which means that this 1 right here would then be in my hundredths, because that's just to the left of my thousandths. Since I don't have any other digits, but I still have this tenths place, I'm going to put a 0 here, and then I can't forget about my decimal points. So I put my decimal point, and this is what 13 thousandths looks like as a decimal. Now, I think in this situation, writing fractions is actually easier, because all I have to do to write this as a fraction is write it as 13 over 1,000. So 13 thousandths. And that's all I have to do to write this number as a fraction. Now, when I move into the expanded form, this is also where it gets a little bit tricky. Normally, we work forwards, working to the starting from here and moving over to the right, decimal by decimal. But I'm going to start with our thousandths place, just because we're familiar with that right now. So over here, in my thousandths place, I have 3 copies of, I'll write this as a decimal, 0.001. So I have 3 copies of 1,000. We should remember how to do that from the previous problem. But now I have this 1. This 1 is not a copy of 1,000 because this 1 is in my hundredths place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a plus sign here because I'm going to be adding on this place value now. And what I have is I have 1, because that's a numeral right there. I have 1 copy of 1/100th. So 1/100th is written as 0.01. So in all, what my expanded form looks like is 1 copy of 1/100th plus 3 copies of 1,000th. Whenever you're doing this expanded form, these decimals are always going to have a 1, and the number that you are multiplying by is the number that you see in your decimal or whatever you have up here. So then it's very similar when we move on to our fractions, except this time I'll start with my hundredths place. So when I write the expanded form of 1 copy of 1/100th, again, I'll write 1 copy of, and then have a parentheses, except this time when I write my fraction, 1/100th is just 1 over 1/100ths. And then I'm going to put this plus sign here because I'm adding on the next place value, which in this case was 3,000. So I have 3 copies of 1,000. And that would be it for the expanded form of 13 thousandths. And remember, if I were to multiply all of this, it should equal out to 13 thousandths. If it doesn't, then I did something wrong here. Now for the unit form, remember, this is very similar to our word form, except that this number right here is being changed into a unit so we can see how many thousandths I have. So I want a numeral. So this number is 13. I'll write it as 13. And then I'll rewrite this unit that I have up here as thousandths. So I'll write that down here just like so. And this is the unit form of this number. So please make sure you have all of this in your notes. And if you are confused or have any questions, please make sure you're raising your hand so I can help you out. Now, we're going to move on to a problem that's going to be a lot trickier. So I'm going to erase this, and I want you following along with me for this next problem. What I'm going to have now is I'm going to have a number that is going to start in standard form as a decimal. So this number is 25 and 413 thousandths. If you have a hard time saying these numbers, you can put them in a place value chart so you can see where the numbers land in the place value chart. It also helps to kind of break apart your numbers. So I can first look at this part and see, okay, if I had this all by itself, I know that that is just the number 25. And then whenever you see a decimal, remember we say and whenever we see a decimal. And again, for this last part, do you remember how we just take apart the number and I just take a look at this? I know how to say this number. This is 413. And then I pay attention to, well, what place value does this 3 land in? This 3 lands in my thousandths place, so I will say 413 thousandths. So again, this number is 25 and 413 thousandths. Now, when I want to write this as a fraction, this is a little bit different now. What I have to do is I'm going to take this number and I'm just going to write it as a whole number. The numbers that go to the left of your decimal place will always just be whole numbers for your fraction. Now, when I get into my decimal, that's when it gets a little bit different because they are fractions of a number. And that helps you to remember that you have to write everything past the right end of your decimal point as a fraction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write 413 over, and can you guess what I'm going to write it over? If I said 413 thousandths, then this number down here has to be thousandths. And that is how I'd write this as a fraction. So again, you just leave the whole number that's to the left of the decimal as it is. But the numbers that come to the right of the decimal points, we are going to take them and put them over a thousandth or whatever decimal place they fall into. Now, expanded form gets a lot trickier, so let's take our time with this one. I'm going to start with the number 2. So for the number 2, I'm going to kind of have the same process from before. So I'm going to write this number 2, so I always start with the numeral that I see, and I'm going to write copies of, or the multiplication symbol, and I'm going to think about what place value is this 2 in. Well, this 2 is in my tens place because it's 2 spots over from my decimal. So I have 2 times 10, or 2 copies of 10, plus, because I'm now adding on my next place value, plus 5, because that's the numeral I see, 5 copies of, and then I look at the place value that the 5 is in. The 5 is in the ones place, so I write 5 copies of 1, or 5 times 1. Then again, I do the plus sign because I'm adding on the next place value. I'm going to continue on down here. This is all one long expanded form number sentence, but I don't have enough space right now. So then I'm going to add on my 4 tenths. So I have 4 copies of 1 tenth. So remember, we write 1 tenth as 0.1. So I have 4 copies of 1 tenth plus 1 copy of 100th. 100, so 0.01 plus, this is kind of a long one, 3 copies of 1,000th. And if you notice, these numbers that are at the beginning of each of these little multiplication sentences, these numbers always match the numbers that I see in my problem or in my standard form. Then the next number is basically just that place value. It's just showing one of that place value, one copy of that place value. So I have 10, 1, 1 tenth, 100th, 1,000th, and that's it. For my fraction form, again, this is pretty similar. I am going to, again, do 2 copies of 10 plus 5 copies of 1. No matter if you're doing decimal or fraction form, all whole numbers or all numbers before the that are to the left of your decimal points are just going to be written in standard form. There's no difference between decimal or fractions. However, what is going to change is when I get into the fraction or into the decimal part. So every number past the decimal points. So I'm going to put that plus sign, and then I'm going to write 4 copies of, and then parentheses, and I'm going to write 1 tenth as a fraction. So 1 over 10. So 4 copies of parentheses, 1 over 10, and put another parentheses. And then I'm going to look at my next place value. I have a 1 copy of 100th, because that is in the hundredths place. And then I add again, because I'm adding on my next place value. And I have 3 copies of 1 over 1,000th. So again, I can check this if I want to, because if I were to multiply and add all this up, it should equal 25 and 413 thousandths. Now, when I want to write this in unit form, there's a lot of different ways that I can do this. So I'm going to show you just a couple of ways. The easiest way, or kind of the easiest way, is I can do each number at a time. So I could say that I have 2 tens, 5 ones, 4 tenths, 1 hundredth, and 3 thousandths. So it might be easier for you to remember like what each place value is and just say it in word form. I have 2 tens, 5 ones, 4 tenths, and so on. But another way that I could do this is I can decompose my numbers and kind of squish them together, group them up to make it easier. So I could say that I have 25 ones, for example, and then I could write that I have 413 thousandths. These two types of units still make up the same number. It's just a different way of showing off their units. You can kind of think of it like money. I could show money in $10 bills, $1 bills, and dimes, or I could show money as 25 $1 bills and a bunch of pennies or something like that. So that's just showing us the different ways that we can make up our numbers in unit form. All right, I know this is kind of a long video, so I'm going to have us move on to the next problem, and then after that, you will be all done with me. So let's take a look at this last problem. And for this very last one, what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to write it out on the board, and then I want you to try it on your own. I'll be coming around to check your answer once you have it done. So we're going to be taking a look at, I'm going to write this in standard form just to help you out. So we have 400 thousandths. So as a decimal, this would be 400 thousandths. And you're also going to be doing the number 404 thousandths, because I want you to see the differences between these two numbers. They sound very similar, 404 thousandths or 400s and 4 thousandths. They sound similar, but you're going to see the importance of that and in your word form of the number. So go ahead and fill out another chart with these two numbers, with the two fraction forms of them, with the expanded form for both decimal and fraction for them, and then try to do the unit form for both of these numbers as well. If you have any questions, please make sure you ask. And remember, after you solve these two problems, I will be coming around to help you out and check your answers. Thank you for a great day, and I hope you had fun.